Hi, Chris.
Hello, Durham opening doors.
Hi. How are you doing this morning?
Doing all right. How about yourself?
That's great. Everyone else will be joining soon.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Looks like it's taking me a while to get get everything going here. Sorry. It's on another meeting. Mhm. Hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving break.
Yes, very nice. How about you?
Well, I was in San Diego for a meeting before Thanksgiving and got back the morning of.
Oh, wow.
Very late flight. So, but it was great. Society of Biblical Literature and American Academy of Religion always has a annual meeting right before Thanksgiving. So we're usually traveling. Okay, everyone. So I guess we're ready to get started then.
I think we're waiting on a few people.
Forward.
We don't have a quorum yet. So let me
Yeah,
see.
Renee, you're the only one on,
Oh, okay.
unless that person that's
They
calling.
know.
I think that's Sharita and that number
Oh.
that just popped in.
Oh, okay.
I don't think that's Sharita.
Doesn't her number have a lot of threes in it? Her phone number? I don't know. I thought it did. I just admitted someone in the meeting.
That's Jeffrey.
Yeah,
I have not.
Oh, okay.
I was about to say Jeff's number has a lot of threes.
Okay.
Well, good
Oh,
morning.
I knew somebody's number had a lot of threes in it.
Okay.
Hey, Sharita, I was just calling you. I saw your
Is that
text. Sorry.
Malcolm? Hi, Malcolm.
Hello there.
Hi, Colin. I saw you calling me, but I was already in mid process of logging in.
No worries. I didn't know if you were calling me saying like you couldn't make it or if you were calling about something else. So I figured I'd call you because we're trying to figure out where we are with quorum. I know Ebony is not going to be here. And so we may not have a quorum to approve minutes. I haven't heard from Colleen. And I know that
She must be running late because she typically joins, and I don't see any excused absence
I
request.
haven't seen anything there. So I guess we can go ahead and get started. We just can't necessarily approve minutes, Renee. We can't make any like official decisions, but I think we can go ahead and we can get through
Okay.
a lot of our agenda items.
Right. Well, we
and
welcomed
plan the-
everybody, and I think we can throw the ball to you then. You can discuss since we can't do anything with minutes,
Mhm.
we can go to agenda item number 3.
That's planning
Where we plan the
the
HSAC
plan
meeting.
the exec meeting. All right, let me pull up the
Okay.
a second. Pull up the agenda item.
Yes. Agenda item number 3 is plan the December HSAC meeting. And that comes to you, Colin.
I'm pulling up the item,
Colin, do you want me to do a real quick hello and introduction since I haven't introduced myself?
what?
Oh, yeah. Please go ahead,
Hi,
Malcolm.
hi, Renee. Some people may know me. I'm Malcolm White. I just started with community development this week, so I'm a community development analyst. I'm happy to be here. Just wanted to let everybody know who I am in the room.
Great.
And I know we've got into the file.
Ellen, I'm gonna put the agenda in the chat. I'm just gonna throw it in there for everyone.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Um, so we have a few things while I'm pulling up the document. Funding priorities, which will be coming out of policy and planning Monday, which they have some things to look at based on information. So that'll be an agenda item. And then we've got Anthony and the performance management team sharing out. And that's something that we actually need to discuss whether or not we need a vote. So Anthony, do you want to talk about that a little bit while I'm pulling up this document? Because that's going to depend. This is going to depend on whether or not we need to vote, whether or not we want the HSAC to vote to approve, or if this is an informational only item. But Anthony, do you want to explain the performance measures that the Performance Management Committee has sort of shared and adopting? And this is more of a, what process would we like to approve these based on the governance documents?
Mhm. So this is agenda item number 5.
It's
Yeah.
kind of part of
Yeah.
it, but it's also part of it. Part of it also is going to depend upon how we answer that. There's a
that
question that
question.
impacts our ability to plan the agenda.
Right. Okay.
That's why I'm kind of flagging it.
Good morning, everybody. I'm just making sure I have both my screens up. Hopefully you all can see my presentation screen, yes?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yes.
good. So this is an early version of a report that I prepared for next week's Performance Management Committee. And wanted you all to understand sort of the process that we went through this year to prepare for next year. The governance charter sets out that the Performance Management Committee reviews and sets the standards for the delivery of services and related data management, and also evaluates implementation of our policies and procedures and provides guidance to HSAC regarding funding recommendations. So you all will be familiar with that during competition time when the Performance Management Committee makes recommendations for funding competitions that ultimately are approved by HSAC. This committee also works with us as the lead agency to consult with recipients of federal funds to establish performance measures, to monitor the performance, evaluate the outcomes, and as necessary, help us to enter performance improvement plans with our providers, as well as recommends reallocation of funds. And then in addition to COC and ESG performance projects, it looks at the outcomes of all projects as part of our housing inventory count. So it's evolving a little bit this year. And I want to address something Colin just said. According to the governance charter and the way I interpret it, unlike funding recommendations and other things, this committee gets to set forth the parameters for the performance measures. It does not appear through the governance documents that should rise to the level of a second HSAC approval. Although I think in the past, what Colin's pointing out is that most things come to HSAC for ultimate approval. But it does not appear that this particular function of this committee would need to rise to that level. So I just want to point that out before we get into the work. We recently had a series of office hours with the Performance Management Committee as well as the providers. I think Reverend Vaughn, you may have attended one or more of those as well, as I know Sally and some others on this call did. And so the point was to have an early look into 2025, well ahead of the semi-annual performance evaluations, to say, how are we doing? Where are we? And the governance charter also sets out that we consult between performance management and the providers to make sure that the goals that we are developing consensus on are fair and make sense for our continuum, as well as honors whatever the funding requirements are and so forth. So we had this series of office hours, as you can see on the screen, and we discussed the related items that you see at each office hours. So in the first one, we talked about PSH projects. In the second one, we talked about street outreach and emergency shelter. The third one, we dealt with rapid rehousing. And then the last one, we did sort of a complete overview and finalized consensus. So I just want to share those things with you all today. I think I can skip this one. We began with a document Lloyd had created in 2022. Until now, the semi-annual evaluations have primarily focused on RRH and PSH programs. So because of that, we had not established performance measures, say for street outreach or emergency shelter unrelated to RRH and PSH. Lloyd had started this process in 2022. And so we wanted to build upon it to expand evaluation to include street outreach and emergency shelter programs. So this page that you're looking at has the original goals that were set out and the measures. And then at the bottom where the asterisk is, those were the existing things that RRH and PSH programs looked at during the evaluation period from the scorecards. So we took all that and then started these conversations, and the next few slides are where we all landed with regard to the performance for those projects. So for street outreach, the performance measures are going to look at engagement, exit destinations, income, health insurance, non-cash benefits, and length of stay. And the percentages you see will be very similar to those you saw on the previous slide, unless we realized that something needed to change and we developed consensus with the projects that it needed to change. So what you see here on this slide is where we landed with regard to those performance measures. I will tell you that, you know, this is not a trick exercise, and that we actually ran scorecards in this process for some of the projects, and most of them are performing at or very close to being successful with these measures for this year. So we don't expect any, you know, any surprises as a result of setting forth these measures. So that's the street outreach measures. For emergency shelter, I want to point out this one included something from the COC application with regard to utilization. It is important that these project types meet certain requirements. And in HUD's case, utilization for emergency shelter should be greater than or equal to 85%. And when it's not, in our COC application process, we have to do a lot of explaining, as well as to develop a plan with a narrative about how we're going to reach it. In the recent COC competition for emergency shelter, we achieved about 84.36%. And so because we were 0.5% under, we had to write an entire narrative about what was our plan going to be to achieve 85%. So we built 85% into, we'll build 85% into the new scorecard and be able to monitor that along the way. The rest of these are pretty standard. Nothing has changed much other than there was separate exit destination goals in the past, one for singles in shelter and one for families in shelter. And the idea was that 35% of singles would exit to positive housing destinations, while 65% of families would exit to housing destinations. And what we did was just took the average of that and made one single goal. The reason we did that is because families were performing way under with regard to the 65%, and singles were performing at the goal. So by leveling the goal this way, it gives kind of both sides something to aspire to. And it's more realistic for families at this point. The next one we worked on, sorry, was rapid rehousing. This did not change much from what we had in the scorecard before, because again, our RH and PSH programs were very similar. And there are the PSH supportive housing programs. The only thing that changed on this one was the exit destinations went up 1% to 96% as required by HUD, because when it is not 96% in your COC application, you have to explain that. So I think what we're trying to show is that this process just brought together stakeholders, the performance management committee, the providers. There was some developing of consensus. There was some consideration of HUD goals and other related factors. And so we're using these markers to develop the new and improved scorecard, which will be brought back next month for approval by performance management. And yeah, that's where we are.
You
So
mean,
we also
you mean
took
next
the
week,
time-
right?
Sorry,
You mean next week, right?
next week. Sorry, what I said?
Okay, you said next month.
Oh, sorry. No, next week.
Okay.
Next week. We also, during this process, took the time to plan out the performance management activities for 2025. And so there's a breadth of activities that you see here. Again, next week, we're approving the performance measures. Next month, we're approving the new scorecard. And then all of the activities that follow. We'll be looking at who needs performance improvement plans, as well as recognizing outstanding performance in the first quarter. We did move the Housing First evaluation, which typically happens earlier in the year, to May, to allow some breathing room between that first semi-annual evaluation and the Housing First evaluation. And so forth. We are anticipating a new state ESG funding competition around July and August. And while we're not anticipating a COC competition next year, we decided to continue with the second semi-annual evaluation, just because there's a chance that HUD will release a special NOFO with additional monies available. So we didn't want to have to play catch up if they did that. So we'll continue everything as if there's going to be a COC competition, even though we know that we don't anticipate one. And then we'll start this process again next year. So that's sort of the end of the presentation. I will stop for a minute and ask for questions, and then go back to the point that Colin was making before I gave the update. So any questions on the information that was
Anthony,
presented?
We have some in the chat.
You have a question in the chat
Okay.
from Charita.
Common questions: are these measures typically what HUD looks at? Yes. So Sharita, the part that you don't see, which is spelled out for the performance management committee, is that these measures are a combination of things. It starts with what HUD looks at as what we have to include no matter what, right? And then it looks at how we've performed. So there are some places where HUD gives guidance, And then there's other places where it just judges you against yourself. Like there's no real, you don't have to set per se a HUD goal. It's a COC goal because you're looking at what's happening in your area. So it includes a combination of all of that. So most of the goals you see are our local goals and expectations, with the exception of where I mentioned HUD requires, like 85% utilization or 96% PSH exits to positive destinations. But the rest of them, most of the rest of them are us judging against ourselves. Does that answer your question?
Asked a ton of questions in there.
Okay, hold on.
So I mean, I've been on performance management before.
Okay.
I've been a scorer before of projects. So
Okay.
I know, like, I've had to go through those, whatever those reports are, to come up with numbers and figure things out. So I kind of know the gist of the lay of the land of kind of how it happens. But I was just wondering if there had been any changes since my days of doing that. And it's probably been 3 or 4 years since I've been on performance management. But then I'm thinking, can we add other parameters? What about local goals and expectations? Um, Suggestion maybe for like a service provider or neighbor evaluation of a project as well. And the reason why I'm asking these things is because the way we look at this information can almost self-inform the interventions that we need to really address in our community. And so I feel like this is a good place for us to start really looking at and connecting the dots between performance management policy and planning and overall HSAC recommendations and suggestions in the future for city and county leadership and the community at large. So I'm just throwing those things out because I think it's one thing to fund projects and look at numbers and things like that. It's a totally different thing when we think about the user end of that experience and what it looks like and how we can be doing things better so that we can be better at ending homelessness in Durham. So
I
that's my
think
spiel.
you certainly said a mouthful there. A large part of that sentiment is why we are going about it this year the way we are, in terms of a lot of early planning, in terms of alerting the project, first of all, building consensus with the projects, and then alerting them about the timeline for next year. So everybody's like really on board very early. Also, the semi-annual evaluations and updated scorecards will be provided to everybody, a couple of months early in the coming year. So it really is the hope that through these efforts and the TA that we will be providing with folks, that we will be using this information in a much better and stronger fashion within our COC. And I will again say that most of the goals that you saw in the presentation are our local goals. So they were built, over some time. And I'm not, it's only my second year here, so I'm not sure how this really differs from 3 or 4 years ago when you were involved, but hopefully it doesn't look drastically different. We went back to the basics and started with the governance charter and said, what is performance management committee supposed to be doing? And that is what we put together, that series of conversations to prepare for next year early in the way that we did. So that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that we have set out a pretty good job of it. I see some more. Sharita says lived experience from people going through the process is so important. Yes, absolutely, 100%. We spend a lot of time in the COC application talking about lived experience. And so agree 100%. Sally, I think, has a question. Let's see. At what point or in what committee can we talk about performance evaluation of other entities which impact SOES, RRH, PSH, or ways that provider agencies, agencies can provide feedback? Can you,
That was kind of where I was getting at in my questions about the other service providers. Like, how do we, accountability? Like I say all the time, I think any projects that we're funding, I think is very important for us to visit. We need to see what we're paying for. We need to kind of imagine what folks' experiences are. We need to know that. It's kind of irresponsible for us just to throw money at the issue and we don't know the realities of the situation. So
excellent.
service providers know that experience because oftentimes we're the ones going to these places or helping make connections connect and things like that. So I think that we have valuable things that we can be able to bring and add to those discussions just to help us do better. Because what's good is the street outreach if for whatever reason people don't want to talk to street outreach.
Right.
What good is it? Like we really need to figure out how to do what we do better than what we're doing again.
Yeah. I see this different. I see that response and what Sally's asking, there might be a difference that we need to clarify. So what has been happening since I've been here up till now is we have only been evaluating RRH and PSH. Even though an emergency shelter program would be evaluated, it would be an emergency shelter program that was operating an RRH program. And so what we've done now is set out parameters to look at street outreach, emergency shelter, RRH, and PSH. And so I think, Colin, you're trying to get in. I know Reverend Vaughn is trying to get in. I would ask Sally to clarify the other entities mentioned, just so I can level set and make sure we're thinking about the same things.
Sure. So I guess, that's a good point, Sharita. I guess I was thinking of it from a slightly different angle, which is regarding, the homeless services providers that are providing street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, PSH, happy to have these performance measures. Obviously, our work is impacted by decisions made by community development, City of Durham, Durham County, et cetera. And and I know that sometimes there are qualitative statements made in reports by community development about housing across Durham or things that might be impacting the performance of the project. But I'm not sort of seeing a place where we can consistently have those conversations about what's impacting performance on projects and do it in a way that is consistent across time. So, obviously what you're presenting, Anthony, is really sort of one thing, which is great that it's being broadened and including more, but I guess I'm wondering at some point, can we talk about a scorecard that sort of reflects some of the realities that homeless service agencies are facing, if that makes sense.
I would say I need more clarification still, but I think we can certainly talk about that later, right? I think
Yes.
It'd be interesting to see. So I think Ricky may want to weigh into, and I know we got to get back to Colin and Reverend Vaughn real quick, but what we did was we looked at the projects that we're currently funding from the variety of different funding streams, those being City ESG, DHF, and others. And so these 4 project types are the predominant project types that are being funded. So if, Sally, if we need to go further, please let us know, right? But I'd want to talk about what those are, and maybe even, we have other COC members that are not funded by us and that may have projects that affect these things that we may not be planning to evaluate because they're not funded by us. So I think that's kind of where you're going. And
yeah, I think, for example, like we've talked a lot about the affordable housing units that have been funded in part by the City of Durham. Do we have a metric that says, what number of affording housing units are homeless clients being able to impact. I mean, I realize it's completely
Yes.
outside of
Yes.
the scope of what you're talking about right now, but I think in order, if there could be a forum in which to
Got you.
discuss this, I
Okay.
realize it's sort of a long time goal, but it's
Yep.
just hard to have context for homeless service provider agencies' performance
Yes.
that is just
Looking at the
with a
broader
like
performance of all the things
feeling,
that
you know,
impact.
like, well, this is happening, you know, like rents are going up, you know, landlords are being pickier, but like it's never like quantified in a way that helps it to be meaningful.
I got you. Yes. And the short answer to that is a resounding yes. There are conversations happening, lots of conversations happening to make progress on that point. And that point also relates back to a lot of the information that's been requested at a broader level about, you know, where are these units, what is the percent, how many are being used, all that stuff. So that information is forthcoming, and there will be a tie-in. It will be outside of this process because this process is about how the specific projects are working. But I think the short answer is yes, it will be brought in to look at other things as well. Reverend Vaughn and then Colin.
Well, I was just going to add that since I've been a part of performance management over the past maybe 3 years, I've seen a great shift toward coordination with all entities. You've made great strides, Anthony. The committee has, I feel, with what you've presented today. I believe it needs to be broadly presented. I would vote for having it presented to the broader HSAC, even if we do not need a vote. I think transparency is important, and it helps to answer some of these broader questions that we consistently bring up.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Colin?
Yeah, I wanted to just sort of help with some of the level set where we talked about rapid rehousing and PSH is what we first started evaluating, but we only evaluated the COC funded projects. So we were only evaluating for years and years and years the COC funded projects. This is the first time that we're looking at who is funded by ESG, state and local ESG, who's been funded by dedicated housing funds, who's been funded by community development block grant. So that's how we started getting into this. And we've been talking about it since I started here. And we didn't have bandwidth before we had, you know, a full team of 7 of us now. Now we've got some bandwidth to start looking at these other funding sources and going into it. And to Sally's point of evaluating sort of things that are outside of the homeless system, it's important to be aware of those. It may or may not fall within the scope of what the Homeless Services Advisory Committee can necessarily evaluate in terms of the affordable housing implementation. There's an affordable housing implementation committee that sort of provides oversight to that. It may be incumbent upon the HSAC to request them to track this, as that's part of really what they're supposed to be doing, is looking at that, or the Citizens Advisory Committee to be asking for feedback on that type of stuff and reporting it back to us. We have to keep in mind, like, what do we have kind of, I don't want to say direct control over, but what are the things that we in the homeless system are able to do and not able to do? And then what do we need other entities that are supposed to be evaluating and monitoring things to be stepping up and doing and being able to tie those together? Because, you know, we were talking about homelessness as a team yesterday for a little over 2 hours and trying to delineate out. There's a lot of variables that go into homelessness, but not all of them are things that we have the expertise to solve. And it's being really mindful of what is our lane and what can we realistically track? Because if we start trying to track and do everything, it's easy to get into mission creep and spend all of our time not necessarily being able to make the progress we need to on everything, pulling the right partners together to do different pieces of the puzzle to solve it, so that we're not creating more silos and really kind of build a barn versus a silo.
believe, Ricky, you have your hand up. You're muted.
And yeah, that part. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to address two things that Sharita and Sally mentioned that I didn't want to get lost. One thing Sharita asked about was feedback from those participating or receiving services from these projects that we're looking at. And Sharita, I can say that, we talked about that like each week at these performance management, office hours. It is something that the lead agency will be looking into. However, for the purpose of these scorecards, we couldn't figure out a way to incorporate that kind of survey piece. But surveying people's experience will be included in the technical assistance that the homeless team offers to projects this year. So I just wanted to like ease any anxiety about that we do care about how people are experiencing services in this community. We just
Mhm.
couldn't find a way to
Yep.
build it into the scorecard that would be accessible to the project providers. Like we're really hoping that with this scorecard, providers can run the numbers on themselves and see how they're doing. So it's not like when the homeless team says, here's your score, there's any surprises. Like with the information that we're asking for, you can see it for yourself if you run the numbers. The other thing that Sally mentioned that I want to make sure that gets addressed is she asked, well, where is the space to talk about how, projects are performing, with constraints or, things happening at other entities that, we have no control over. And to Sally, to that extent, I would say, please share that feedback during performance management committee meetings. Also, please share that feedback with your project manager who is overseeing your funded projects. We want to hear that information, and the performance management committee meetings are the place to air those things so that we can take them into consideration, because by and large, you guys are like at the end of it, and all these other things have happened before the person you're assisting has, gotten to you. And so please elevate those, concerns to your project manager and or during performance management committee meetings.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Great.
Madam
Well,
Chair, I think at least my part is done unless there are other questions. Thank
Colin,
you,
I think,
Sharita. Ricky and I'll follow up with you, Sharita, on those materials.
great. Colin, I was just thinking that we, as a result of Anthony's presentation, that we should add this to the agenda for the HSAC meeting.
Yeah, no, it's on the agenda, and that's why I wanted Anthony to talk about this, because as we were already planning to have this as part of the HSAC agenda, and while we're getting ready to build the agenda, I wanted Anthony to share this because part of our agenda setting is executive committee needs to determine whether or not we want HSAC to vote to approve this, or do you want to make this informational only? And that's why I kind of wanted you to know what was in this, to decide whether or not HSAC is just receiving the information, or do we want HSAC to, for lack of a better term, secondarily approve what performance management approved. As we shared, as Anthony shared, the charter sort of gives the authority or permission to the performance management committee to make the decision to do this. Historically, we have taken this, even when performance management has made the decision, this is what we would like to do, it has also gone back to the full HSAC for full HSAC approval and adoption. And there's not really a right or a wrong way. It's, a secondary level of approval on one side, and it obviously takes, an extra week or two for final adoption of this, these types of policies or procedures and benchmarks. So, just talking through which way would we like to move forward, and how would you like to handle this as an agenda item, as an informational or as a vote?
I would encourage, to the extent that my opinion matters with this, I would encourage that we honor the governance charters, language with regarding this. I think if the governance charter allows for the performance management committee to set the decisions, because Reverend Vaughn, you're on HSAC exec and you're on performance management, and so are others. And so you get a chance to sort of witness the process that we go through. So, we've been especially grateful to you all. Most of the performance management committee are also HSAC members. So I do think, as Reverend Vaughn pointed out earlier, it's important to bring the information back to HSAC. But I would vote, or I would suggest that it be information only. I think the second layer of approval sort of takes away from the empowered ability of the committee to finalize its own work and do its work. That's all. I don't know what the other opinions of folks are, but I like the idea of the committees being empowered to do what the charter sets them out to do without having to run everything through this secondary approval, even though I think everything should be run back to the full body for information purposes. That's where I would suggest, but very open.
Reverend Vaughn, is it okay if I add one more thing?
Sure.
You can say no. You can be like, no, I don't recognize you.
Sure.
You can say that.
I know. But
No,
I do.
I just want to amplify what Anthony said about empowering our committees, as is outlined in the charter. We have done a lot of work over the last few months to draw people to committees, to have those active, conversations, those working meetings where we are, problem solving, talking about things, challenging thoughts, and the participation of the performance management committee office hours was so robust. Like each week we had numerous people, attending, giving their thoughts, asking to be emailed certain things so they can, provide their comments if they weren't going to be able to attend the next meeting. And so in the spirit of all the work that went into finalizing the scorecard and all the community participation that we, had, and provider participation, I think really we should empower that committee to do what they are, capable of doing, and saying, hey, we did the legwork, this is what we've agreed to, and just bring that information to HSAC as information only.
Okay. Well, to wrap this up, are there any other comments, and do we need to vote on it? Any other comments? Eliza, I think you're on. Did you have any comments? Anyone else? Okay. Do we need to vote, or can we just
We don't
have
need
stuff?
we don't need to vote on it. It's just
Okay.
really just kind of which direction would you like to go with it, and
Mhm.
nothing formal on it, because like I said, the the charter doesn't force the HSAC governing body to approve this. It's just,
Mhm.
you know, which way would you like to go? And we can explain so that HSAC understands why HSAC, and that's the piece. If we're presenting it as informational only, we'll make sure we explain the governance documents so that everybody's on the same page, like, oh, okay, this is why it's not a voting issue.
Okay, sounds good. And I believe we have determined that it will be informational only.
Perfect. We can do that.
Okay,
All right, then we can finish go back to the agenda planning, if you would like, Madam Chair.
yeah, sounds good.
Thank you
Mhm.
for allowing us to have this discussion. I think it was important so that we could make the planning a little bit smoother. All right, everybody see this? So we got the welcome, approval of minutes. I think policy and planning is due for an update. And then we've got the funding request to the city and county that'll be coming out of policy and planning Monday. And then a review of the updated performance metrics that we just talked about. So we know this is going to be informational only. Do we want or need a white flag update, a pit update, or night of remembrance stuff? I kind of feel like we should have an update on white flag because we're just getting ready to move to Yates after using a motel. And a motel will be in use for a period of time over the Christmas holiday, as it's tough to do a white flag during Christmas in a church. And then Pitt will be happening in January. So there's one more HSAC meeting prior to the Pitt count, but a lot of stuff will happen before the next update.
Sounds good.
Does this look like a decent agenda?
Mhm.
All right. Anything else that anyone feels like we should need to add?
If there's anything.
Sally's
else.
got a question. Sally, what's your question?
Oh, no,
Uh,
this is going back. So you finish on the agenda. This is just oh, by the way, thing. So go ahead and finish the agenda.
Okay.
All right. So we'll figure out the time frames for these and get this sent out. If that works for you all. Look good?
Okay, it looks good to me. Any other comments?
Sharita, do you have any thoughts on the? Nope. Okay. All right, then we're good. We'll make this our agenda and we'll rock and roll.
So I guess we're ready for our next agenda item, which is also you calling, I believe.
Yes. What is the?
Funding priorities
Let
for the
me
funding
pull up.
priorities.
See if I can pull this up here. See if I can share my screen again. Disappeared. Ah, there it is. Okay. So essentially, I don't know if you all can see this slide here. You see this? All right. So policy and planning had asked the homeless team to come up with a recommendation for them to kick around. And based on the priority 1 categories that policy and planning had voted and set up in, I think it was the October meeting off the top of my head, there were several things that were identified as immediate needs while we work on a strategic plan. And what we wanted to do is not punt everything down the road until a strategic plan is done, but sort of say what could be done in the short term to move the needle and help people. And policy and planning identified, increasing the amount of diversion money, increased street outreach capacity, emergency shelters, day center. And when we as a homeless team talked about it, looked at it and said, if we take all of our resources and put it on people who are currently unsheltered, we're going to have a challenge in that there won't be a way to get people from unsheltered to permanent housing unless we sort of bring in some additional housing subsidies and supportive services. So the recommendation from the homeless team is that we make a combined $2.4 million request, $1.2 million going to the city, which would include $200,000 on top of what's already in the contract. This is additional money that would start July 1, 2025 to be part of coordinated entry with diversion or some other diversion assistance program to help people be diverted, return to family, friends out of the area, or to rapidly exit homelessness through security deposits, first month's rent, rent arrears, whatever the barrier is to getting somebody into housing. And this, based on current average cost per exit per household, that $200,000 could help up to an additional 233 households per year. Then the next piece would be looking at street outreach capacity, as right now there are currently 5 people on the street outreach team, and they're currently actively managing 73 encampments, keeping an eye on nearly 100 other previous encampments that have a tendency to pop back up online and providing supportive services while they're responding to this. Currently, just as an offshoot today, we're dealing with 3 separate encampments that are hot topics. One was on Queen Street, blocking the sidewalk with a fire going in between the sidewalk and the road, and needing to sort of get people off the sidewalk. Not to say you can't camp there, but you can't block the sidewalk. It becomes a safety issue for people trying to walk down the sidewalk in that area. And there are 3 tents in Oakwood Park that need some attention, and another tent that's out on an easement. And those are just 3 today on top of 75 others that are sort of creating headaches and people having very strong opinions about them. So this would bring in additional staff to provide supportive services to individuals and families who are unsheltered and try and help them connect to resources. Flexible housing subsidies and funds for supportive services. This would be, actually, it should be 700,000, not 750. So $700,000 would serve up to 35 households. And when we ran our numbers, there were 36 people who were currently waiting for permanent supportive housing. And we typically have about an average of 1 permanent supportive housing unit opening a month on average. So it would take us 3 years to clear the current list. And this was a way of trying to increase some capacity, and not necessarily that this would be for chronically homeless. We just used that as a benchmark of what could be done and what size project could be done. So these flexible vouchers could be used for people who meet the definition of chronic homelessness. It could be for rapid rehousing. It could be for any number of ways we could slice and dice to meet the need or fill a gap where there currently isn't a service. When we're talking about appropriate supportive services, that is not limited to case management. It would be, oh, you need a home health aide and nobody will pay for it. Here's money that is a supportive service for home health aide. You need to pay for a psychiatric visit and don't have Medicaid yet, you can pay the psychiatrist. It would be sort of what is needed to help that particular household get housed. So that's what $1.2 million to the city would be for.
Colin, you have some notes in the chat regarding some updated funding that was acquired by the county. You might want to address that before you move on.
Street outreach. So street outreach was awarded $2 million from the county. And do we want to do it? That's something policy and planning can look at the $2 million from the county was really focused on street medicine and sort of pop-up stuff. This is what this street outreach is looking at is a true street outreach and supportive services to help with all the encampments, which is not my understanding of what the $2 million from the county is. But this is something that policy and planning could say we can pull that and put it towards flexible vouchers or put it towards diversion. And there's nothing wrong with moving it. We were just going by what was shared and prioritized in the policy and planning committee.
Mhm.
Yeah, but we just wasn't, I wasn't aware of these other funding. It just makes no sense to refund or overfund one project. Because I think Eliza's saying that it's good to the end of not September 2026. We will be approving this for 2026, right?
This would be
It would pay fiscal year 2025, 2026, right?
yes, excuse me. Depending on how quickly it got into contract, yes, it could, or it could go past 2026, depending on when the contract started. It would be the soonest these funds would be available would be July 1 if the city agreed to do it. Then
July 1, 2025.
2025. And then we would have to go through a procurement process to figure out who's getting the money. It would have to go into contract. By the time it got into contract, you're probably close to December or January. So this would be at least a 12-month contract that would go past June 30th of 2026.
Mm.
Gotcha.
And
I'll just make note of that and I'll bring that up in our policy and planning meeting. Thanks.
Yeah, and the other piece is this would sort of also be able to help because we don't have street outreach doesn't have capacity to do weekends, after hours, and on-call responses for things. So we've been utilizing Heart to go out and do a lot of this, which is great, and Heart can do that. So it's trying to figure out what group, who needs to be doing which pieces of this, and a lot of our supportive services for our folks who are unsheltered, having folks who can go out and kind of respond when we get urgent calls. And right now, with the number of staff that Street Outreach has, it's not always a guarantee that we can get somebody out that same day to a certain encampment, depending on what's happening. So having additional people to be able to go out and check on encampments that are being reported same day would be really, really advantageous for us as a system to engage or get feedback to appropriate officials. Go ahead, Eliza.
Just wanted to also add that there's like a communication strategy here around who people call. So like I call 911 at times for things like there's someone laying like that was asking for money but now laying close to the road and I'm worried about them. And so I think there's like a how do we, if we're expanding street outreach but community understands to call 911 because of Heart, how do we help either divert or do a better job communicating if we're expanding capacity for those for that reason. And I'm one of those people like I don't know what else to do, but I know that the community thread is call 911 and Heart is available.
Mhm.
So just another thing to think about, a communications campaign of sorts, to help route those things to the right place.
Absolutely. And that's a great point, Eliza, because we do have, there was a whole system in place for encampments that folks could call or email a number, but due to the capacity of the program that was set up 4 years ago, there's no guarantee that somebody could get out there that day, and there was no guarantee that people would be able to sit there and answer a phone. So a lot of these would go to voicemail or email, and within a day or two, street outreach would go out and try and make contact with encampments. And I see Russ joined. So Russ, we're talking about street outreach and $2 million that's coming from the county and some of these requests, and making sure we don't duplicate services. And I'm not sure that additional unsheltered coordinating agency street outreach workers is duplicating what's in the county's $2 million budget. I think there's a difference between the two. And we were sort of talking about that. We may need you to weigh in.
I mean, I can comment on what the plan is if that's helpful.
Yeah.
Okay,
Great.
sorry. I somebody said my name 3 times and I appeared, so there you go. Sorry. So the plan, see, a couple people got it. They're releasing it out on Max today, so there you go. So that money is designed as a pilot to really, in a sense, check on 2 things. One is having an established rotation of basically pop-ups in different locations around town, because around the county, because we know that one, not everybody wants to come downtown, and 2, I don't think that we want everyone to come downtown. If we can avoid that, if we can go out and serve people where they are, that's preferable. And so part of what will be tested is, having these pop-ups where there's place to charge phones, there's place to get some basic supplies, and then that's part of it. And then the other test is adding in nurses, psychiatrists, behavioral health supports, because what our team has been seeing is there are a lot of people who, while we absolutely remain committed to housing first and getting people to skip shelter and go straight to housing and have and other options and have supportive services attached to it, some people's medical situations are such that they can't think through moving toward housing. So, that's something we're seeing in other communities that have been successful. So a lot of the investment is actually in the very costly side of like medical and behavioral health staffing being included. There are some more engagement specialists included there, and a source specialist. And part of that was, I think, in hopes that as a community, there would be some increases, as I see is being proposed here, to the UCA contract, because I think, as Colin probably has said, the staffing was designed based on the numbers in 2018, which are now more than 300% higher than they were in 2018. So yeah. I don't know if that's helpful or not. I'll stop there.
Okay. So are we comfortable with, this is what's going to policy and planning? Policy and planning will kick it around and tweak it out and make a final recommendation to the full HSAC. We wanted to share kind of where this is with the executive committee at this point in time. There'll be more discussion about it Mondays, so in the policy and planning committee. And you'll recall earlier I said we're looking at a $2.4 million request. So this is what the HSAC would be requesting the city to put $1.2 million towards these specific things. Then the HSAC would then ask the county to put forth $1.2 million to expand emergency shelter and provide day center supportive services. And the expansion of emergency shelter, we as a homeless team did not get into determining how much of $1.2 million should go towards emergency shelter, how much of that should go towards day center. That was something that we didn't feel comfortable saying, okay, 600 each or $1 million here and 200 there. And expanding emergency shelter does not necessarily limit to a building. We want to expand emergency shelter bed right now. From the pandemic to now, we have 15 fewer beds for women and we have 18 fewer beds for men. So in order to expand emergency shelter, we want anything that comes out of this must serve more than 15 women and more than 18 men, because that would give us a net increase over our pre-pandemic numbers. And how anybody applies for this to serve emergency shelter, it could be a sanctioned tent village. It could be pallet homes. It could be motel rooms. It could be, somebody's got a brand new shelter that they're opening up. It could be anything to meet the needs on the singles. Our families, we have not seen a sizable decrease pre-pandemic. I think there's like one room offline. So anything on the family side and or couples would be advantageous to see an increase in people being served. We could also talk about adding in, households with pets, if that was something policy and planning wanted to do. So this is kind of how to do that. And then day center and supportive services would be kind of part of the RFP to define what services would go in there. And we would come back to policy and planning and others to talk about what activities should be built into that type of program. So that's kind of where we are on this. And this, all right, so these things would be, so these $1.2 million from each are on top of what we're already funding in the system. This is new money to do new and expanded services. We don't have more money currently available. Without this, we'll be doing exactly what we've been doing for the last 24, 36 months, because there isn't sizable money to do any of this without additional money and resources put in by the county and by the city. We also had to be mindful of budget requests because this is budget request season. And, I don't know what the total budget of that available is, but let's just say there's $20 million on the city side. There's probably $50 million of request for that 20 million. So we want to make sure that we're putting forth something that's reasonable and could possibly be funded. And we also have to be mindful of the amount of money that we're asking for. It's not going to fix all of the problems. It's just enough to at least start moving us in the right direction. And we also have to have capacity within our system to be able to deploy it. Because as we found during the ESG COVID money, when too much money hits the system all at once, it gets very difficult to deploy and have it work its way through just due to capacity issues throughout the system, because all of this is going to require organizations to hire more people. Hiring people takes time, which sometimes delays implementation. All of this takes time, and we want to be mindful of that we are putting something into place that could be manageable for all parties involved.
We have a couple questions in the chat, Colin.
Excuse me. Urban ministries, could they apply to? No, well, they would have to expand beyond their previous capacity. So if they applied, they would have to say, we're not going back to 15 and 18. They would have to be like, well, we're going to 16 and 19. And then sure, they could apply because they're increasing capacity. Then the question is, would they be able to, would that be competitive compared to somebody else who said, I'm going to do, 3 families and 17 women and 20 men and 4 couples. So if somebody were going to do that, that would probably be a stronger application than only increasing by 1 or 2. So we're really looking at where are we going to get the biggest bang for the buck? And none of this, as we're looking at this, none of this money is earmarked to any organization whatsoever. All of this would have to go through a competitive procurement process, and it would be, here's what we need to see, and bring us solutions, bring us ideas, and it will go through, get scored, and be put into contract.
Sally wanted to know if the RFP would be awarded to a single agency or multiple agencies.
Don't know. It could be a single, it could be partnerships, it could be any number of things. It depends on how people respond to the RFP. Like I said, this is not targeted to one organization, 20 organizations. We're just trying to say, here's the need, and here's the amount of money that we think would be worth putting into the system to see it. And then depending on how people apply for it, then we go for it. Or people don't apply for it. And if nobody applies for it, then the system stays as the system stays. And funding that's going to end June 30th, 2025. So we do have a bunch of contracts that are ending June 30th, 2025. This money is separate from that. And we're trying to figure out the RFPs for the current contracts of coordinated entry with diversion, unsheltered coordinating agency, landlord engagement, white flag, and HOPWA all need an RFP. And some of those some of that may get punted down the road depending on where spending is. But there'll at least be 3 or 4 different scopes of work. This money is separate from that. And could it be tied to a contract that is already in place, or would it be a separate contract? I don't know. So there might be 2 RFPs. Probably would be 2 RFPs.
And Colin, I have a question. I just want to make sure that it addresses some prior things we've heard, which is there's an upcoming city county meeting.
Yep.
And when we went, Eliza, to the pre-housing shelter meeting, there was this school of thought of like, when the information is presented at the city county meeting, who should be there to support, publicly comment, have presence around that meeting to support this. So I'll stop and let you kick in, Eliza, because I just didn't want to lose the opportunity for whatever is about to go to this meeting to have the proper support it needs, because it's been seen, it was described by Council Member Caballero that the requests have been coming in the form of a written note without a lot of public building of public support and presence from HSAC and others. So Eliza, I just want to bring that up.
Yeah, I was able to chat with Colin on the phone, so I'll share what he shared with me and jump in, Colin, if I miss something. But my understanding.
Before you start,
Yeah,
just
sure.
a little bit of background. A lot of information came to me late yesterday afternoon. So I got an email from the county clerk with some information that I had requested and didn't know it. And Eliza had texted me about something the night before, asking for some things about Tuesday based on conversations she had had with one of the council members. So I finally got a chance to call Eliza last night and sort of talk to her. So I just want to sort of set the stage of how and why all of this. It's not like trying to work around a system. It's trying to coordinate with a bunch of stuff moving in different places.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah. And when you say finally get to me, I feel like, in 24 hours or less. So thanks for setting the context. It sounds like the meeting on the 10th is a meeting to share information more than it is a public comment meeting. So I owe an email to the pre-housing shelter group. I kind of said, hey, this meeting is happening. It'd be great if people would come. I think it's good to be in a space, even if you can't, there's not a public comment or there's not an opportunity to speak, to hear, and then also think about like there's opportunities for conversations after and all of that. So what it sounds like is that first, this needs to go to policy and planning on Monday. And if there are any changes, that would be something that would also change some of this presentation. But what I'm planning to do is invite and give that update to the pre-housing shelter group, which is a lot of overlap with people on the COC, some additional players. And I think there's an opportunity to think about folks from the business community that may be interested in attending and continuing the conversation. I think once there is like the balance that I'm trying to find as the subcommittee chair of pre-housing shelter of the housing task force is the alignment of what HSAC wants to push as and policy and planning as the pieces that they want funded and adding more voices to that. There may not be complete alignment across all of the things, but I think there is an opportunity to have several people come forward and at least name the places where there is alignment in public comments down the road, at the county meetings, at the city meetings, the county commissioner, not the city council members at the pre-housing shelter meeting share that there is a date where they too put in projects. So is there an opportunity for CD through HSAC's approval to input some things for city council members and county commissioners to have some alignment on requests going into the budget, and then also having people come and speak at public comment across many sectors in alignment. And I think that's what I'm thinking about in terms of elevating, because there are so many requests. So there is an angle of bringing forward this request beyond just HSAC saying this is important. And so that's where I'm trying to figure out where the alignment is and not wanting to move too quickly, also recognizing that what's being shared today is something that policy and planning needs to talk about Monday. And I would not be surprised if there was some editing. So I think that is the pieces there that I'm thinking about. So hopefully that answers, Anthony, your question. I think the Tuesday presentation is a starting point. And there are more opportunities to continue figuring out where we can share and speak, but showing up, I think, says something.
The Tuesday presentation, where and when is that?
All right, I can jump in on that. So this is a joint city-county meeting, the county council or county commissioner city council joint meeting Tuesday morning at 9:30. And one of the questions I had was folks had asked, is there an opportunity for public comment? And when I asked the clerk whether that there isn't a public comment period on this particular agenda, and I guess that's just the standard for joint city county council commissioner meetings, is there isn't a standard public comment period. And she said it's really up to the chair to determine whether or not they acknowledge anybody in the room to speak. So, people are welcome to come and hang out nine or I think it's 9 o'clock Tuesday morning at the county's offices, their room, and yes, HSAC spoke because we were presenting. We were both doing a joint presentation, and this presentation was requested. There was different differing information that has been asked of us to be presented in a variety of ways. So the presentation is really kind of how much money is the city putting into the homeless system? How many people are being served on the regular basis? How many people are not able to access services? And what are some possible solutions to help serve some additional people? So the whole presentation works through those particular pieces. And those 2 slides I just showed you are part of the solutions and part of that narrative, because policy and planning will have just met on Tuesday. So there will be an asterisk on those, and HSAC hasn't approved those slides. This is more to say there is a $2.4 million request coming to you all formally after HSAC's meeting, and there may be some changing within these line items, but this is kind of a rough framework to get city and county elected officials' heads wrapped around what the dollar request is and tying it back to these gaps that they will clearly see that, we've got some serious gaps here. And if we do this, what that closing of the gaps would entail. And that's sort of why we have this presentation and slide.
Okay. Sounds good. Russ, you have your hand up?
I was just going to kind of affirm what Eliza was saying, but also just mention that I think we're in this extremely unique moment where there's an enormous amount of energy from the business community. And while there's a lot of frustration from them, right now the frustration is not directed at the homeless system. It is directed, or the folks that we serve and connect with. The frustration part is directed at other systems, we'll call it. But we have a unique opportunity, I think, to ride some of that energy if we build this forward. And I really appreciate the work that Colin and team and others have done, because I think this is the strongest I feel like I've seen in terms of having like numbers and data, and here's where we want to invest this. And that very much reflects what the city manager shared in the last I think it was the last HSEC meeting, maybe the one before. But I think there probably could be quite a few business people at that meeting on Tuesday potentially. So, and more than one of them have written letters asking for there to be more investment in this. And so just sharing that, I mean, I think a campaign could really form in a really good way. And so I appreciate the work that's been done to get us to this point. But we got to kind of ride the wave as best we can, because it's going to go either way, whether we're on it or not. So great leadership.
And to Russ's point, this is kind of the part that even if there isn't a public comment on Tuesday's meeting, it's going to be really important for HSAC members to show up for public comment at city council and county commissioner meetings in January, February, and March, April, May, as the budget process is working its way through, and be very vocal about whatever the final request is of the HSAC, whatever that final document is being an advocate for it and talking to the elected officials, emailing the elected officials, speaking at public comment, and keeping it front and center. That old adage, squeaky wheel gets the grease. And how do we do that? And as city employees, we are unable to go and do much more than present the information. We have to leave it to the folks who are not employed by the city to be the advocates.
Yeah, we have to make sure that there's communication so that the HSAC members will be aware.
Yep.
Know how to present ourselves. Okay. Well, it looks like we are running out of time. Did we ever get quorum?
No.
No. Okay.
We don't really
But
have anything we need to
we
approve.
will not be able to approve minutes then.
And
Okay.
then I saw Sharita had a question on what does serve mean. And serve, I think that was Sharita, you were talking about the flexible housing vouchers? Or is that?
No, in the statement that you were just making about this joint city county meeting, they wanted some solutions from us about how to serve this population
Oh.
better. And so my question is, what does serve mean? And the definition of that is very important. So do you just want a street outreach person just to be working with them, or do you want them to have a place to live? So I think understanding what city county means by serve is very important to us formulating our response. So I think that's a question that should be asked. What is your expectation of us serving?
So they didn't use the word serve, that was my word.
Okay.
It was more, what are the solutions? And how do we help these folks? So sorry, I chose a bad word.
You didn't, because I want to know what the expectation.
The expectation
So, yes.
The expectation is what is needed to help people who are unsheltered. We know we see a growing unsheltered number, and what resources need to be available to make this happen. And that's sort of where that prioritization exercise happened in policy and planning. And it really focused on the unsheltered is what came out of that. And then when policy and planning asked the homeless team to come up with sort of a recommendation, we looked at this and said, if we only focus on unsheltered, all we're going to have is a system that helps unsheltered. And that number is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and eventually fill up, and we're going to not be able to serve more unsheltered people. So in order to do this, we need to serve unsheltered, and we need to be able to also have a place for people to exit to on a permanent strategy. So in order to move this, you got to work on both sides of the spectrum, right? So we have a flow of people who are unsheltered to housing. And if you only do one, you're going to have a problem.
All right. Well, if there are no further comments, we've got a couple more minutes. Great discussion. I've learned a lot today. And what time is the Policy and Planning Committee meeting?
10:30.
10:30.
10:30. Okay, great. So those of us that can join will on Monday. Do we need a motion to adjourn, or do we just
You can adjourn us.
Oh,
You call
okay,
yourself
well,
adjourn us.
great work, everybody. Thanks for your comments and everything that's being done. Liza, thanks for bringing forward all of that information. That's really important. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks all. Take care.
Take care, everybody.
Great time management.